is the Argo CD API. So the Argo CD API front end is really the thing that you're going to be interacting with. There's a few ways to interact with it, but from like a baseline point of view, you're going to want to interact with it using the Argo CD API. So whether that be the Argo CD CLI, whether that be the Argo CD UI, that's kind of the central idea, right? So I'm of the opinion of that you interact Argo CD with Argo CD using Argo CD's API directly.
Okay.
There's people like, yes, you can manage it using kubectl, blah blah blah. That's fine. Like if you're like an administrator and you want to get down and trying to debug, right? But like if you are giving access to Argo CD, you're gonna want to interact with Argo CD API directly. And the reason for that is that originally, this is like way back, right? Like, and if people ask me, back everyone was talking about like, oh, the Kubernetes UI. What's the Kubernetes UI? I'm like, for me, it's always been Argo CD. For like my personal opinion, like whether you're using GitOps or not, like for me, the best UI is the Argo CD, right? And the reason for that is it's kind of like a platform in itself, right? There's like RBAC, you can manage users, you can manage authorization, you can manage access, right? Like it's not just like a UI, it's like an entire platform. And so you want to leverage all those tools, right? You want to be able to leverage the authentication, RBAC, what do you call it? The triage, right? You want to manage all of that using the Argo CD API, right? And so I think here in this chapter, like kind of like introduction is like there's different methods of interacting with Argo CD. We go through all those methods, right? Just because, just for me, it's always like I'm gonna give you all the ways to manage, to do something, and then I'll give you my personal opinion, right? Because there's a difference between like anti-patterns and things I don't like, right? So it's like, just because you don't like something, it doesn't mean it's an anti-pattern, right? Because I think Andy kind of very little bit disagrees with me a little bit, just because of the multi-tenancy aspect of OpenShift. Whereas like if you're just using like just straight Kubernetes from like EKS, whatever, right? Like all of that, you have to build in the multi-tenancy, and the best way to do that is with like Argo CD and Argo CD, UI. So Andy, I don't know if you have anything to add or rebut from what I said.
I think that makes sense completely. I'm wondering from the group here, how do you interact with Argo CD? A little bit of an informal poll. How do you interact? We're going to talk through a number of them, whether it be the API, whether it be through the UI, whether it be through the CLI. How do you typically go ahead and interact with Argo CD?
Or the HTTP client, like Curl or Python HTTP or Node.js.
Yeah, that's the API I was going with. Yeah.
In my environment, it's the UI and it's the OpenShift GitOps operator. That's I know it's still Argo CD underneath, right? But
yeah.
Who else? UI, CLI. Okay, Andrew, go ahead. I'll have my opinions for last.
I mean,
I'll tell you which one is the best one. I
use the UI, but however, I just use the UI to see it. I don't actually use the UI.
You stole my thunder. Fine. Okay, go ahead.
And I also use it honestly to be able to just test things, get something out there, and then capture the manifests, and then put them into Git and have them be managed by Argo.
So Andrew is Team Carlos. Christian, do you like to edit everything in the UI and then edit again next week and then edit again next week when you come back?
Interacting with Argo CD for me has always been since I'm like a GitOps purist, right? Like I always try to do everything with like basically managing it. It's going to be with GitOps workflows, right? Like monitoring and like triage and status updates and stuff like that. I'm just gonna drop in the UI, kind of like Andy, right? That's like I'm kind of using it like a good monitoring tool.
Yeah. I love the UI in terms of visuals, right? I open it up and I'm trying to help someone else, like open the UI. because it would be the fastest way for someone to like, well, you have a red dot in that box. We have a problem. Click on it. You go to the next level. You have a problem on that, or yellow, right? Yellow, red. Click on it. You get to the pod. What's wrong with this pod of this deployment? The config, the YAML is wrong, or it's missing a config map, and then like all those answers are not Argo CD, are just Kubernetes things. You're like looking at Kubernetes through the lens of this Argo CD UI for the deployment. So that's where a little bit of like philosophical of like using Argo CD, but you actually like seeing Kubernetes things most of the time, not Argo things, if that makes any sense. And like Andy took my thunder, where I'm a purist also. Like the CD, the UI is for visual interfaces. If you do mutations, it's just for testing things and iterating. Why it doesn't work, and to actually get the right YAML, until you get the right YAML configuration and get a copy, and then put that in a pull request, right? So everybody can review it, everybody can agree, and we can merge it. But yeah, we're moving into a direction where like maybe you don't have to do that iteration of me like trying to fix the YAML multiple times in the UI. We ask a AI bot to say, hey, fix me my UI, and fix the UI, and tell like, yeah, that's the YAML that I want. Go ahead and open a pull request, and the AI agent will open the pull request. And CLI, when let's move to CLI. So when should I use the CLI? I discovered the CLI like a year after using the UI for a year. I didn't know there was a CLI in Argo CD. I don't use it often because I try to do everything declarative. But the CLI comes a lot in production conversations when people ask like, how do I sync into production? I think, Christian, we did in a live stream, we talk about this. So, Andrew, what's your take on the CLI?
I barely use it.
And
I mean, it's not. I use it here and there to do some testing, but aside from that, I don't use it. I'm very team declarative.
Team declarative. Okay. So this is why we have a book club, right? The author cannot put those words in the text, right? In the book, or Riley would say like, what is this team? What is like get us purist, and what is team declarative, right? Christian?
Yeah,
CLI?
I use the CLI probably more than Andy does, but
Really?
probably less than the average user, right? So so for things like for instance, like Acuity gives you, or probably like any vendor that offers like kind of like Argo CD, you don't get access to the Kubernetes cluster that Argo CD is running on if they're hosting it for you. So you have to interact with it somehow, and it's either through Git or through the Argo CD CLI, right? And so I probably use it a little bit more. I found out actually some commands. So when I say a little bit more than Andy, but less than regular users, like I would fill out an RF. Yeah, well, I would fill out an RFE, and someone would say, "Well, that's already there." I'm like, "Oh, today I learned something." Just so it's so I don't use it as much, but I do use it, right? So it's very good for creating applications, right? So like meaning that like I have like a stack of applications that I just want to on the fly just apply it, and if I don't have access to the Kubernetes cluster, right? Let's say that like I don't like I'm a developer, right? I'm just the user of Argo CD. I'm not the admin of Argo CD. So if I want to apply my applications, I don't have kubectl, and I may or may not have read and write access to the UI. I'll use a CLI to apply. So I've done to create applications. So but for the most part, I kind of just throw everything in Git and let Argo CD. And even my application manifest, I'll just throw it in Git and let Argo CD take it from there.
So my theory is like is something that goes along with the philosophy of GitOps, right? Because we are telling users you should put the configuration of your applications in Git and deploy them with this pattern, right? Of like all the configuration of this application is on Git. I can see it. That's the configuration that every cluster will get. Or if I destroy the cluster, those applications will be configured like this. Is in Git source of truth, like the definition of GitOps. The CLI is there, and it's like, well, I use the CLI to configure the Argo CD application. Argo CD is an application, it's a pod, it's a deployment like your Hello World app. So it should be configured the same way of the Hello World app with YAMLs, declarative way to configure Argo CD and deploy with GitOps. And that's where it comes like Argo CD, managing Argo CD, right? Kind of thing, that kind of pattern. I don't know if it comes up in the book, but that's where like you don't see, at least myself, my theory is you will not see a lot of CLI to configure Argo CD, like accounts, like projects, adding clusters, and I'm more like Christian said, like let's create an app, or get the information of the app, or sync an app, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that I see. That's my theory. I don't know what you guys think, or
Yeah.
Sebi.
What's interesting, Raymond actually brings up an interesting point, and I think that goes more. And I think we'll go over this in later, later weeks when we talk about CI/CD. But like in like the CI process, a lot of people use a CLI to do like Argo CD sync and wait, right? So like you do like your CI process, you do a sync and then you do a wait for that sync to happen, right? So it's a blocking operation. Like you want that blocking operation in your CI/CD process. So people use like in the in the CI/CD process. So that's like really, I think that's where a lot of people use the Argo CD CLI.
That step, Cargo can do it, CLI can do it, and it's public knowledge. A lot of like the big companies that have given talks in KubeCon, they talk about using Jenkins and GitHub Actions for that step to sync into production, right? Once they get the change management done, thumbs up, manual approvals, automation. So Andy, what do you see in the enterprise in OpenShift customers? In terms like, most everybody is aware about that step, about that sync, or you see more people like not knowing about it and they just put auto sync everywhere, production, non-production?
Most people use auto sync because it's easy. I'm seeing it more and more. I see fewer of my customers actually using the change windows, which the sync windows, pardon me.
Sync windows from the projects. I think we covered that in the book.
Yeah, later on. We'll get to that in a few weeks.
So what's your best practice? Like you're the expert here. Like you should do auto sync. Should we do that stage sync at scale in production? In production, I'm talking like real systems. Like managing my transaction, my bank.
What I typically do is I have it then be controlled by a CI pipeline. So Argo is always on sync, and then you have your CI pipeline roll the changes out to your app.
Okay. So
it makes it less to manage because you have everything managed through CI, and you then use whatever tool you have, because a lot of times a deployment is going to involve multiple tools, and you usually have it coordinated by a central system.
Coordinated through a central system. So that's where like Promoter, Cargo. What other projects? Always mention Promoter and Cargo. What other like system open source projects or vendors do this with Argo CD specifically?
I think
Hernandez has something.
CodeFresh has an orchestrator as well for GitOps. Telefonistica, I think, is something that
they gave a talk.
Yeah, it's something that was born at Wayfair, and I think it's been then recently moved into like its own kind of like project. So it lives out. It used to live in the Wayfair repo, but now it's there.
Is that the person that gave like 2 talks in ArgoCon?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we should get those links and then we can add them to the notes. So
and there's a lot of enterprise tools like udeploy and etc. out there that handles deployment of different components. So big community.
Yes. What I'm seeing here, the API. So let's talk about the API. This is showing Swagger that you can access the API. And then the configuration.
This basically kind of talked about how extensible Argo is. So if you want to go ahead and build your own tools, you can just hit the API directly. The CLI, the UI goes ahead and talks to the API anyways. This allows you to have your own integrations with it.
So it's a REST API, right? So you can use any HTTP client. You get back JSON. You send JSON. This is the Swagger to that configuration.
Yeah. This is what the Terraform provider uses, by the way. If you're using the Argo CD Terraform provider, it basically hits the API. Yeah.
That Go code in Terraform talks to this API to create an app or create a cluster and those type of things. One thing I want to mention back, maybe it's past, but I'm going to mention briefly is if you're using the Argo CD CLI and you're going to add a cluster, and you're going to add a cluster from AWS, from a cloud provider, any case, please do not use the defaults, because it would automatically create a hard token that never expires in that remote cluster, and it lives forever. It's a hard-coded token. Bring it back to Argo CD, copy paste it, and that's the token that if somebody gets to that token can hack into your cluster. So you need to pass extra parameters to configure AIM access, workload identity. I think that's also available. It's available for GCP and Azure, but want to make sure that that's a common mistake that people do with Argo CD CLI. Software easy to get the credentials from your to create that token, or take the credentials from your laptop and hard coding them into Argo CD. So using AIM is a best practice, something that I encounter all the time with people with misconfiguration of remote clusters, because they use the Argo CD CLI improperly, not the Argo CD CLI. I don't know if you've seen that or not, Christian, with other cloud providers.
Yeah. So like you said, it's very easy, very straightforward, right? To add a cluster, but then like it creates a service account, like you said, like with the forever token. Like you don't necessarily want that, right? Like you want to use identity management for your cloud provider, right? Identity access management, or like just-in-time tokens, right? I think, Andy, you have a blog about that as well. Like I don't think we included it too much in the book, but I think Andy has a nice blog about like just-in-time tokens with respect to Argo CD access.
Yep.
So the question for you, the experts, is I'm showing right now in here that the way you can configure Argo CD is with a set configuration. Can come to Argo CD, the repo server, application stat, like these pods through config maps, but also secrets that Argo CD would just fetch into that Kubernetes cluster. So this is a way that you can configure like Argo CD with declarative, like Kubernetes resources, Kubernetes maps and secrets, and those secrets will have special annotations that dictate what is the type of secret looking at. If it's a like for Git, the Git configuration, like if it's repo crash versus cluster. So this is when you're bootstrapping Argo CD. This is a kind of like the configuration that you put in place either through the Helm chart or beforehand. Also the secrets, and then when Argo CD boosts up, you get that configuration. Is it true that I can configure these config maps and secrets through the Argo CD UI and CLIs, that the UI, the API will give you access to mutate these things, or where do they get mutated?
Yeah, with Argo CD, not every configuration is available in the UI. So that's just kind of like
like adding a cluster is not available, right?
Some like
certain you have to weird things.
Certain things like that. Like you can edit a cluster, but you can't add one. Like it's just like those things aren't like 100% there, right? And so then you'd have to drop into like the CLI, but not like everything is available in the CLI. Everything's available either through the API, or what most people do, most administrators do, is via the config map or the secrets, right? And so typically you'd want to do this declaratively, and you do it declarative, especially with secrets. Like you'd want to use like some sort of secret management system. I like using ESO, right? The external secrets operator. That's just kind of just been my favorite. Starting with Argo CD 3.0, we're actually a little bit more opinionated about like we're like actually you don't want to use Vault. We want you to use some sort of external secrets, or some sort of reference to a secret that then gets applied at runtime, right?
So you can use Vault.
You
can. There are some newer tools in Vault's ecosystem. I think, Christian, what you're saying is you don't want to use the Vault plugin.
Correct. Yes, correct. The Vault plugin,
to inject into the YAML as it's going to the Kubernetes API. Inject those things with the plugins, with any plugin, even a custom plugin.
Yeah.
So one thing that I know you guys can talk more about. Actually, I want you to talk more about it. Is the misconception that when folks talk about Argo configuration secrets, like secret for the cluster or secret for Git or GitHub, like the client secret or the token for accessing your Git repository, those are secrets that are not mounted in the pod of Argo CD. It's not like a typical application secret that you can use the CSI driver. A lot of people are like, hey, why don't put all these secrets in the CSI driver? Because that's the best practice, at least that for EKS, that's the best practice of CSI secrets. Why we cannot put them there? Because the way Argo CD works is these secrets are like dynamic configuration. It's not like like a secret, typical secret that an application has at boot time. It's like secrets that come and go, but they cannot be config maps, right? They and also the config maps is something that it's a boot time. Yeah, the config maps are boot time. They're kind of mounted. The secrets are not mounted. It's something that you keep adding GitHub repos or Git repos and clusters, and Argo CD does an API call to Kubernetes to get those secrets. Have you found that confusion or that statement? Like, it's weird for me that people asking me that thing. Like, yeah, maybe we don't have it documented or it's not clear.
Yeah, it's actually not really really clear that that's what's happening, right? And like with respect to like creating, this is just like in general, right? Like creating applications for Kubernetes, or do you want cloud native applications? Like you want that kind of hot reload functionality, right? It's different than you're migrating applications onto Kubernetes, right? Like maybe you're used to having to restart, right? Like the application in order to like reread like those configurations. But yeah, like some of these is like you add it and then you refresh the page, right? Like on the UI, and it's there, right? Because like the secret has been updated or your access has been updated, and those are kind of like dynamically read, right? Like as soon as it's mutated, the application, like let's for example, the application controller or whatever reads that like as soon as it's applied, right? A lot of people don't know that, but you're right. There's some things that you do have to restart things, right? Like because they're like mounted. And so yeah. So anyways, in general, like Argo CD follows kind of like the cloud native approach of like, hey, your secrets, your configuration should be hot loaded, right? As soon as there's a change, it should like reload it like right away. So that way you're not like, killing pods and stuff like that, and trying to do like a progressive rollout or something.
Yeah. One thing that I want to mention is I mean, I don't know if we have other Argo CD nerds from the 23 people here, but I discovered the other day of like, what about if I change the config map? Who do I need to restart the pod of Argo CD to read that config map? So it depends. And I found this the other day. So if you are installing through YAML files, like YAML config map and YAML deployment Argo CD, you update the config map. Argo CD will not know about the changes because it's mounted as from, right? So it's not like you're saying like hot reloading. But when I did it through Helm, it actually, my pod started restarting automatically when I just changed a Helm value for the config map. When I went in there in the Helm chart, I saw that the trick is they put a checksum.
There's a checksum.
There's a checksum that they put in the annotation or label. I cannot remember. One of those two.
It's an annotation.
Annotation. And then since that changes, go ahead.
It's a Helm trick, and it's actually a pretty good one.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew. Can you explain it better than me?
Helm maintainer.
Helm maintainer to
I'm missing the Helm developer talk, so I might as well talk about Helm while I'm at it. So one of the cool tricks about Helm is that, and one of the challenges is if you update, let's say a deployment, there are certain fields that even if you update it like on a config map, a secret, you might want to reload your app to pick up on the changes, just like this use case. The trick to getting away with that is that in Helm, you can go ahead and do a checksum on that config map. And if it changes, you'll then get a different value inside your deployment manifest, which will then trigger the change.
Yeah. Also,
why not everyone knows this? Why is not in the big line in the Helm documentation? Like or maybe everybody knows. I didn't know. Like this is the most better thing that I found. Like I'm adding this to all my Helm charts that I'm giving everyone, my customers, myself, like putting this, like, because they update the config map Helm install. Like
so it is. It's in the documentation.
Okay, good. I don't.
Give me a second. I'll pull it up.
You can also do that with Customize. I always use the config map generator for Customize, right? Because that's also another way to like be able to have re-trigger.
So how does it work in Customize? Remind me again. I think I used the generator to generate the config map out of environment variables, but how do we trigger back to the deployment?
Yeah, so what ends up happening is that the config map generator generates the name with like, it's foo dash, it's some sort of hash, right? And then it'll mutate the deployment to have that name, right? So like there's like that you can call your config map foo, and then in your deployment you can reference foo, but then when you do a customized build, it'll give that that configuration that name, right? So it basically it changed the config map, right? Which will then trigger a rollout. So
do you have? Can you find a link and add it to the notes? Andy found the. I don't know who shared this. Luke. Okay. Luke share that line number 32 that I discovered. If people are watching this recording and like, what this folks talking about, like fighting over YAML and Helm and tricks, this is where we get paid for it, guys. So we're fighting over this line that is so magical that if the config map in this Helm chart changes, it will calculate the checksum, and then it will update the notation, making the template of the pod different. So then the deployment will say, I need to redeploy the application with this new configuration. And that's how you get the new values of the config map for Argo CD loaded into Argo CD. So if you install through the other instructions in Argo CD, which is just kubectl .yaml, it doesn't do it. Christian, why do Argo CD doesn't offer like a customized that have this side feature that you talk about? Like if you change the config map, it automatically loads the Argo CD. Is not possible, or it's not important, is not applicable.
Yeah, so I think since there's a lot of tools out there, there hasn't been like a need to do that, right? There's also Reloader.
Reloaded, yes.
That basically just does that, right? For just philosophically, Argo CD tries to act like a glorified kubectl. So like if Kubernetes and kubectl doesn't naturally do it, then as a community we're hesitant to like add any other things on. Doesn't mean it's impossible or like we never do it. We obviously add quality of life features, but like we use that philosophy to kind of guide us to building Argo CD, and then we'll deviate where it makes sense, right? And so
okay, so this is not try to defend my position, right? But this is one of the reasons I recommend when you are in enterprise systems that Argo CD is deploying Argo CD, or Argo CD is managing itself. Use the Helm deployment method, because if you change the config map in Git, it would deploy this Helm chart, render it again, and then that's you get the behavior of like restarting Argo CD when you change the config map. Right? So if you point to a folder that is just flat files, you change the config map, like all those hundreds of Argo CD that you're managing doesn't get the updates. So that's something to look into when you're in production. There's Andy put the Helm here. Let me put it here. Yeah, let me show it for people watching the video. On the chasm or the pattern, where are we looking here?
Just search for checksum. I'm sure it's going to be in there. There you go.
There you go. Automatic roll. Okay, so I'm going to put this in LinkedIn. I think that a lot of people don't know this. Who knew this already? Or maybe who didn't know this and learned this today? Put it in the chat. Or maybe a thumbs up.
What I used to do is I used to do it in CI, like basically kind of what Luke was saying, but I used to do it in CI where I would just annotate, add an annotation of the version, right? So like, I used to, version my my YAML, as a bundle.
The tag,
right?
like the tag, like a tag.
Yeah,
like
exactly. I'll take the tag of the commit and basically annotate all my manifests to that tag. So if there is a change, it'll just reload it.
Okay. So at least we got 3 thumbs up. So the conversation was useful. 4, and Sevi also learned that today. Yeah. I learned it the other day. Like I learned something about Argo CD or Argo rollouts or Argo events every day. Something new. So in this book, I'm going to do more things every Thursday with Christian and Andy. What other links people shared? I think that's
nice.
it.
That's another good one.
Who?
Air, a live reloader for Go apps.
Yeah. One library loader, another library loader is a new CRD or a new version of ESO, external secret operator, which Seb is familiar with it. Some of her friends are the main creators and contributors of that. Is they're going to add the ability that if a secret change, they're going to roll out the deployment. So you don't need an extra reloader or anything. So that's a feature that they're adding into external secret operator. I saw the proposal the other day, and that's useful because then you don't have to have two controllers or two things for that. Like if the secret change, external secret operator can trigger or can make that hook for the deployment that it depends on. What's the other thing that I wanted to talk? Oh, there was a question about namespacing. So let's go back to the book, and I want to ask a question about installation on these config maps and secrets again. So going back here, and then I'll ask a question.
Yeah, we didn't really get through all of like installation last week, so I think it's a good time for sure.
Yeah, installation was chapter 2. We didn't get that far, so that chapter talks about doing it with Helm, with the customize. So one thing is namespaces. So one situation I'm having with some end users is they have so many apps that go beyond 3,000 apps that the Argo CD UI doesn't render. It gets very slow. It doesn't work. So what they're doing is installing multiple copies of Argo CD. So they get to a point that Adobe even did a talk with this on ArgoCon. So they install like Argo 1, Argo 2, Argo 3, Argo 4 in different namespaces of a single cluster, for example. What are the things to watch out for example, CRDs, versions of Argo CD, like version 2.5 and 2.14. The CRDs are different, it's compatible because it's one set of CRDs. And do you have to do something special if those Argo CDs are managing the same cluster, different namespaces? Like you have to like any special configurations around that area running multiple Argo CDs in multiple namespaces in the same cluster?
Yeah,
the big thing for me is if you're running multiple Argos, to watch out that they're not trying to manage the same resource.
So how do I avoid that?
Don't configure it. Don't.
Yeah.
You're gonna.
So
yeah,
so Argo CD, like when you install, so there is a namespace version of Argo CD that you can install. There's documentations around that, but when you create, it's basically setting the RBAC rules for the service account, right? So when you install Argo CD in a namespace environment, it creates a service account. And you just got to make sure that service account only has access to that one namespace. Really, that's kind of like the long and short of it. To basically be able to do that, I think with what's really cool about the Red Hat's OpenShift GitOps implementation is you can do that with an annotation, right? So OpenShift GitOps has an annotation to where like when you annotate a namespace, Argo CD then automatically gets access to that namespace, right? So as an administrator, it's either annotation or label. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know it's
a label. It's a managed by label.
It's a managed by label, yeah, like managed by blah blah blah, and then you annotate it. Oh, sorry, you label it, and then Argo CD has that. So
yeah, you label the target, and you basically say who am I managed by.
Yeah, exactly. Who I'm managed by. The issue that Carlos that you were discussing is like actually a known issue, and the community. I posted a link there. I think Raymond knows about it as well. There's the server side pagination, right? Mm-hmm. So it is like basically that the reason why the UI gets slow is because the pagination happens on your. Really, you should complain. You should complain to yourself, right? It's your laptop's problem.
I need to get bigger laptop to manage Argo CD. I'll tell my boss.
Yeah. you need to have 256 gigs of RAM on your laptop in order to use Argo CD. But so the solution is really is server side pagination, right? And the community knows about that, and it's working on the on that upstream where the pagination happens server side, so you don't have to, like you said, you don't have to ask your boss for a server to be able to on your laptop to be able to manage our Argo CD. So
okay, so yeah, if you're watching or you're here and you want to contribute to that that feature. I think some customer or end users would appreciate it. And it was
it
a
sounds
design dog.
helpful.
There's a design dog. There's a proposal. There has been a lot of discussions. It's just like get it to the finish line in terms of testing and implementation and code reviews, right? That's it. This is an open source project, so some maintainers work full time, but they have other priorities. Other maintainers do it on their free time. So that's how open source is. But the design and the discussions of the top leaders of the project went into them. One of them was Acuity. That if you have that problem, then maybe Acuity is something that can you hit that scale. Acuity can handle that. And they have a blog post. I don't know if you want to put the blog. It was a good blog. So I think Jesse did it, right?
Yeah, Jesse did that
the architecture of the agent pattern type of thing of that pattern. So yeah, Acuity can solve that. I guess all the vendors also will have that solution. But for open source, yeah, Argo CD, like any open source project, has their limits. Let me stop sharing because Save is going to close us out. I need to drop, but yeah, appreciate it. Everyone's here. Like this, I think is one of the records attendance, 24 people. I'm super surprised that people that use Kubernetes like GitOps, maybe. We'll see you folks.
See you, Carlos. Yeah, I'll take over. And I don't know if you guys actually had the chance to discuss, or yeah, I'm still reading the book. I have one question about the repository structure, like if you wanted to take this into the scope of the book or not. But now we mentioned about pagination and some limitations. I was really wondering, what's the breaking point, or like when would be Argo CD be the single point of failure if we just, pushed it hard? So, because we had a lot of discussions in the past with, clients and some teams, like, okay, what if I scale it up? What things I should consider? So it was something I really wanted to ask you guys with the experience you have at hand.
Yeah, so so funnily enough, Carlos dropped off, but like Canoe actually did a good blog about application scalability. So this this was in conjunction like with members of the community, Michael Crenshaw, who's at Intuit, who's very, very much involved. Kind of just did a stress test, right? That's very, very good to look at. I would read through that thoroughly. Obviously, it's gonna quote unquote depend, right? But there are a few things that are just generally like you want to take a look at, right? I think first and foremost, above anything else, you want to take a look at your repository server, right? Your repo server. And when I say your repository server, I mean the actual controller on Argo CD. You want to keep track of that, right? So because there's one controller that manages everything, right? So it's not like Flux, right? Like where Flux is like you have your Helm repository controller, your OCI controller, your Git controller. They're all like independent. Argo has one, right? It has one that does everything. And so when things like when you're using something like a mono repo, right? So like when we discussed this like in further chapters, but just kind of high level, mono repo is like you put all your YAML in one repository, right? You're using Customize, right? You're using Helm, whatever, right? Like to manage but you have one repo. Basically, you have one repo. And so any changes is going to cause Argo's repo server to load your entire repository in memory, right? Even if you're changing an app, only one app, it'll basically cascade to your other apps because your other apps relies on that one server, right? There's no really isolation. There's proposals to change that a little bit. I think Dan Garfield from CodeFresh is kind of leading a little bit of that, but that's a one to take a look at, right? Your repository server is going to be really, really busy, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of changes. And especially if you're running a mono repo, right? That's kind of like the first thing you want to look at, and the first thing you kind of want to monitor in terms of like if you're like on Prometheus and Grafana, you want to graph that, you want to look at the repo server, probably first and foremost, right? The second one is your application, right? The application server that actually interacts with your Kubernetes cluster and your namespaces in the Kubernetes API. If you have, there's one by default, right? And usually that's okay. But if you have like a really busy system, again, with constant changes, that, you know, that one pod is, you know, if you have 1,000 servers, is managing, you know, 1,000 Kubernetes API endpoints, right? And then at that point, you want to just kind of start sharding. I know I see Luke in the chat, right? Like he's done like sharding where it's like, okay, sharding is done on a per cluster basis, right? So like if you have a very, very busy cluster, maybe you want to assign one shard specifically to that cluster, and then every other cluster gets assigned to the other shard. Like there's different ways of doing that, right? And so that's really like kind of like, for me, the top two things is really, one, the repo server. Take a look at that. That's like usually the first thing that people hit is the problem with the repo server. So scale that up and out when you need to monitor that. And then after that, then you start sharding the application controller, right? And so, yeah, Andy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or anything maybe that you've seen working on OpenShift.
Not in particular, actually. For once, there's nothing really specific to OpenShift here. It's yeah.
Yeah. Also, if you're gonna touch the repository structures or like the patterns later in the book, let me not go into that. Maybe when the chapter comes, we can discuss this. But I guess it's really it's directly related to that. But I was thinking about the drift, the platform drift, and how, you know, what type of I don't know, suggestions you might have related to that, because again, we had really heated discussions when we were setting up our Argo CD repositories in the past, like, okay, I really don't want anyone to touch this one, like the production one. Can I get someone to, once everything is approved on this one, I don't know, the staging, for example, can I get automatically copied everything by scripts, and so that nothing is, we make sure no one touches that. No, let's not do this. Let's do feature branches. No, it was like quite a lot of conversations. So I was thinking if you're going to touch those topics later in the book, or if you have any suggestions.
We are going to touch it later in the book, right? I think in later chapters, right? I think what you're bringing up is a sort of an advanced topic, right? There's a lot of schools of thought. None of them are really like best practice or hard and fast, right, rule to do things. I myself am I'm a fan of rendered manifests and storing those on branches, right? And you know, usually a no in GitOps is storing environments in branches, right? But we're not talking about Git flow, right? Like you're still using chunk-based development, right? Main is still your interface, right? You're still using folders, right, for your different environments. But when you render those out, you're rendering them to like a read-only branch, right? And then you deploy from that branch, right? You never merge branches together, right? You have like a dev branch and the stage branch, but you're not merging them, right? You're just kind of using them as a storage. I think now with 3.1, when 3.1 comes out in a couple of weeks, actually, OCI support is there. So I'll probably end up switching, instead of putting them in branches, putting them in OCI, right? And kind of creating a bundle. But in general, I'm a big fan of rendered manifests and putting those in branches. There's, you know, pros and cons. We can probably get that is really a what do you call it, an advanced topic, and it's something we do go through like later on, towards the end of the book, for sure.
Just want to mention, even though you're just starting your Argo CD journey, like, if you're not a user, if you have to set it up somewhere, this comes as the first thing. Like, how do you set it up? Your repositories, how you set it up, your environments, like do you separate your environments, etc. That's why we had it really early on, and I think we weren't super prepared as a team of platform engineers who didn't have a lot of Argo CD experience. We just knew the tool, but we actually hadn't, I guess,
what I
brought
always
up the environment.
What I always suggest is don't do analysis paralysis. You're going to see a lot of things out there, a lot of discussions about,
Yeah,
oh, you should structure it
unfortunately
this
we went
way
into
and do
that.
this complex thing. And this goes back to just Kubernetes in general. Not everyone's Google. Not everyone is Uber. Do what's comfortable for your organization. If you just need a simple repository and some simple structures, great. If you need some more complex workflows, go and look into some of the patterns that are out there. But don't over-engineer things off the bat. Get comfortable, start testing around in a test environment, or even better, do it on kind, like we describe in the book.
Yeah, okay. I very much appreciate this approach because yes, this was the first wall we hit, and we unfortunately went into analysis paralysis situation, and it was happening in front of our clients, so that was not good. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to mention from the third chapter? So you know what I thought also, a reflection, and that's probably wrong. I thought, okay, we are now with Argo CD promoting very healthy GitOps practices. This is now really big. Why would I need CLI then? Apart from, yes, the CI/CD integrations, etc. But that can still be done through APIs, right? So I was thinking, is it actually not promoting, but just letting people have bad practices because they're just new and they just don't know GitOps was something I thought of. But
well, I mean, I think that goes back to what Andy's saying, and originally what Argo CD was built for. Like Argo CD was built for on-ramping and providing a good user experience to Kubernetes, right? That's just kind of just went into it. It's like, hey, we're migrating to Kubernetes. There's not a lot of tools. It's better build our own tools, right? And so it's kind of really like a DevOps tool for Kubernetes that just happens to do GitOps really, really well, right? So you don't necessarily you don't have to buy into GitOps a lot of the ways. I mean, just kind of just in general, like just kind of do what works for you, kind of like what Andy says. But if you're asking me personal opinion, obviously, like I'm managing Kubernetes the way it's meant to be managed, right? Because Kubernetes is declarative. It's whether it's the deployment in etcd or your deployment in Git, like it's declarative, right? And so I want to manage the system the way it was built, declaratively, right? And so then now, it's really. You know what, Andy, we kind of missed at the end a way to interact with at this particular chapter is like another way to interact with Argo CD is through Git, right? I don't think we actually say that.
I think we indirectly implied it.
I think we indirectly implied, but we didn't say explicitly. It was like, okay, we have all of this methods. Git is another way, and that's
we gotta make the user come to that conclusion themselves.
Yes,
true. Yeah,
of course. I also am fully aware of the evolution of all the practices, and like now GitOps is maybe stronger, but how Argo CD started maybe was just also this needed the CLI tools and other ways to interact with it. I'm going to turn to the audience if they have any questions. I actually saw one question that unfortunately when the discussion was really fast, I want to turn back to this. Jamal had a question. Is it possible to install and run Argo CD in a specific namespace on OpenShift 4.17 as a non-admin user without cluster-wide privileges?
Yes, there is. So I don't want to go too much in the OpenShift world, but there are two modes that you can put into Argo. You can put Argo into cluster mode. You can put Argo into namespace mode. By default, when you install the operator itself, it deploys in cluster mode inside the OpenShift GitOps namespace. However, any other instance of an Argo CD custom resource will go into user mode, and that can be in any namespace that you'd like. You can configure other cluster level Argos as well through a configuration in the subscription resource, but by default, it will always go into user mode. And if you have any questions regarding Argo, hit me up on Slack. Happy to go ahead and talk about OpenShift in Argo.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I know everyone has to go back to work, especially in the US. Thanks for joining us. And thanks, Christian, Andrew. It was an amazing session. And I'll see you next week.
Awesome.